I used to think depression was just a prolonged state of sadness, like a relentless summer rain that would eventually stop. But no, when it truly arrived, I realized it wasn't a temporary shower, but an endless gray winter. Every morning, the alarm clock rang like a stranger. I didn't want to open my eyes, didn't want to pull back the covers, didn't want to face the new day. Even taking a deep breath felt heavy. My chest felt like it had a massive rock pressing down on it, suffocating each breath. There was no joy, no motivation. All the things that once interested me, reading books, listening to music, meeting friends, now feel meaningless. I still smile when I need to, still nod when someone talks to me, but it's all just a mask. The superficial conversations, the forced smiles are just to hide the truth that inside, I'm falling apart piece by piece. Day by day, I avoid social gatherings. When my phone rings, I turn off the ringer. When messages come in, I leave them unread. I withdraw into myself, shut the door, pull the curtains tight, and let myself drift in the terrifying silence. Nighttime brings no rest. Instead of sleeping, I lay awake, my mind racing, replaying mistakes, failures, and thoughtless words from others that I felt had hurt me. Some nights I cried without knowing why. Tears soaked my pillow, but my heart remained heavy. Sometimes I ask myself, do I even want to exist tomorrow? But then, like a coward, I push the question aside, afraid to seek an answer. I fear the very thought, yet I'm also weary of continuing to live. Depression isn't as loud as people imagine. It doesn't come with screams, no warnings, no telling when it will end. It quietly creeps into every corner of your soul, suffocating you bit by bit, making you want to scream for help, yet also want to stay silent. And so, day by day, I sank deeper. Each morning when I woke up, I felt myself being pulled down further into the depths. It seemed there was no way out, no hand strong enough to pull me up. I began to believe that this would be the rest of my life, a life in darkness, with weary breaths and a heart growing cold. But I didn't know that amidst that thick darkness, there was still a small ray of light waiting to be found. That afternoon, the rain poured down as if the sky wanted to wash away everything on the earth. Raindrops hit the window pane, sliding down in streaks. I sat motionless by the window, my eyes following those meaningless streams. In the silent room, the sound of rain was the only thing that existed. But instead of feeling peaceful, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of loneliness. The phone lay idle on the table, its screen flickering on and off. A missed call. Then a message appeared. I didn't bother to reach for it, as if it belonged to another world, a world I had left behind long ago. The sounds that once connected me to others now only evoked fatigue and a sense of distance. I no longer have the energy to pretend to care, nor the strength to open my heart. In that moment, the thought of ending it all suddenly crept into my mind, like an uninvited guest sitting down right next to me. It whispered, how much easier it would be if you didn't have to wake up anymore. No one would care. Everyone would quickly forget. That whisper was strange. It was both cold and seductive. I began to imagine a scenario where I disappeared, leaving no trace, simply fading into nothingness as if I had never existed. The thought frightened me, but at the same time, it brought a strange sensation, like standing on the edge of a cliff, trembling yet being drawn downward. I remember sitting like that for a long time, my eyes vacant, my mind empty. Time seemed to freeze. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. Inside, another storm was swirling in my mind. I felt utterly useless. No one needed me, no one truly understood me, and no one would suffer if I left. In fact, I even thought that disappearing would free everyone, free me and those I loved. But just then, when my mind was about to give up, something strange happened. In the silence, amid the steady patter of rain, I heard another sound. Not the ringing of a phone, not the wind, but a soft, faint voice so quiet I wasn't sure it was real. The voice didn't scold or lecture. It simply whispered, wait, just a little longer. I don't know why I listened. Maybe it was a reflex or a lingering fear, but deep in my heart, I felt that the voice carried something different, as if an invisible hand was trying to hold me back, preventing me from crossing the final boundary. For the first time, I realized that perhaps I wasn't completely alone. Perhaps there was still some being. I didn't know who, I dared not be certain, but who was silently watching over me, waiting for me not to give up. And with just one reason, no matter how small, I could sit back down and wait, just a little longer. I looked up at the window. The rain was still falling, but in my eyes, each raindrop suddenly seemed to hold something warmer, softer. I just couldn't name it yet. A few days after that afternoon rain, I was still living in a state of half-existence, half-disappearance. The days passed slowly with nothing to look forward to. I wasn't looking for anyone, nor did I want anyone to find me. However, one late afternoon, my phone rang. The caller's name appeared on the screen, an old friend from university. We hadn't been in touch for years since each of us had gone our separate ways. I couldn't understand why he was calling me now. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let the phone ring, and then hang up as I usually did. But for some reason, this time I picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was still warm and a bit humorous as always, but there was an unusual seriousness to it. After a few brief greetings, he suddenly said, "I feel like I need to see you right away. Will you go to church with me tomorrow?" I hesitated a little. A church? If it had been before, I would have immediately found a reason to refuse. Busy, inconvenient, or simply not interested. But at that moment, for some reason, I didn't say no. Perhaps it was because I had no plans for tomorrow. Or maybe, deep down, I was tired of locking myself inside four walls. Okay, I heard myself answer, as if the speaker wasn't me. The next morning, the sky was clear, and gentle sunlight streamed through the window. I left the house with an unclear mindset, neither expecting nor resisting. As I entered the church grounds, I immediately sensed a different atmosphere. The murmur of conversation, laughter from small groups, and somewhere the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the warm scent of wood. But it all remained outside my shell. I kept my distance, walking beside my friend but not truly joining in. We sat down in the middle row. The room was bright, with high ceilings and stained glass windows reflecting the light. I had never noticed the beauty of a place like this before. When the music began, I was still indifferent. But just a few seconds after the choir began to sing, my heart suddenly felt as if someone had touched it lightly. The warm, gentle, yet powerful melodies filled the room. The lyrics spoke of unconditional love, of a being who always waits no matter how far we go, of hands that never let go. I don't know why, but each line felt like it was written just for me, for someone trying to hide their collapse behind forced smiles. My eyes blurred. A feeling of suffocation welled up, not loud, just deep and profound. I didn't want to cry, but I couldn't stop the tears from falling. In that moment, I no longer heard the voices around me, no longer felt anyone's gaze. Only the singing remained, and something was gently knocking on the door of my heart, a door that had been closed for far too long. For the first time in months, I felt I wasn't completely invisible. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still some love left for me, even though I didn't understand it, even though I wasn't ready to believe it. But it was enough for me to sit back and listen to one more song. I don't know what this is the beginning of, but deep down, I feel like I've taken a small step out of the darkness. The gathering that day continued in a warm and musical atmosphere. I thought I would just sit and listen until everyone left. But then, a moment touched the deepest part of my heart. The pastor stepped up to the pulpit, his voice not loud or urgent, but gentle, as if he were having a conversation. He spoke of people who once thought they had no value, that their lives were nothing but failure and darkness. He spoke of the feeling of being abandoned, forgotten, and overwhelmed by their own negative thoughts. Then he paused, looked around the room, and said, "You are loved, even when you feel worthless." Those words rang out like a bell striking directly at my heart. I didn't know why such simple words could shake me so deeply. For months, I had lived with a sense of uselessness, seeing myself as a burden to others. I had believed that no one could love someone like me, lazy, weak, and full of flaws. Yet now, someone stood before me, affirming the opposite. Not with logic or empty words, but with a voice filled with certainty and warmth. I tried to hold back my tears. I had lived too long behind a facade of strength, afraid even to let tears fall. But then, I couldn't hold back anymore. The first tear slid down my cheek. It fell slowly, but once it did, everything seemed to break open. Drop by drop, they washed away months of emotional drought. I no longer cared if the person beside me saw. All I felt was a gentle comfort seeping into my heart, quiet, without judgment. In that moment, I didn't know if I believed in God or not. Faith to me was still a foreign concept. But I knew one thing for sure. I was being embraced by something greater than myself. It was as if an invisible hand was gently resting on my shoulder, saying, "You are not alone. You have never been alone." That day I prayed for the first time, not with polished or lengthy words, but with a few clumsy, hesitant sentences. "If you are real, please don't abandon me." That was all. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt as though a long-standing void in my heart had been filled with a fragile peace. Not all the sadness disappeared immediately, but I knew I had found a small thread to hold on to, a thread that could lead me out of the depths. The meeting ended. I left with red eyes and a heavy heart, but at the same time I felt a little lighter than when I had entered. Perhaps the first tear was not just a sign of weakness, but a sign that my heart still had hope for healing. After that group session, I couldn't forget the warm feeling that crept into my heart. It was like a small flame, still weak but enough on earth for me to want to protect and cherish. I didn't know where it would lead me, but for the first time in months, I felt there was something worth waiting for. I began to search. At first, it was just simple actions. I went online and typed in keywords like "God loves," Bible verses about hope, and "Is God real?" I didn't think I'd find anything specific, but I came across countless stories, testimonies, and short yet profound Bible verses. Some phrases made me read them over and over again, as if each word was touching the hidden corners of my heart. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you." Strangely enough, those words didn't make me feel pressured or compelled to become better right away. They were simply like a light blanket covering me, letting me know that I was still being cared for. I began cultivating a new habit. Each morning, instead of curling up in bed and letting negative thoughts take over, I set my alarm a little earlier, brewed myself a cup of hot tea, and opened a few pages of the Bible or some short reflections. At first, this wasn't easy. Some days I still lay in bed and skipped it. But on the days I made the effort, my mood for the day felt lighter. One of the small things that changed me the most was writing down things I was grateful for. At first, my list was short and ordinary. Thank you for the sunshine this morning. Thank you for the message from my friend. Thank you for the hot cup of tea. I used to think writing like this was meaningless, but gradually I realized I was learning to focus on the bright spots in life, even if they were just small dots in an otherwise dark picture. I also began to write down Bible verses that moved me. There were some I didn't fully understand, but I wrote them down anyway, as if to let them sink in little by little. Sometimes I even tried short prayers simply saying, "Lord, I don't know what to do with myself, but please be with me." I haven't escaped depression yet. Long sleepless nights and heavy mornings still come. But amidst those dark moments, I realize I'm no longer completely helpless. It's like being in a closed room, and suddenly a narrow crack appears, letting in a sliver of light. Not enough to illuminate everything, but enough for me to know that there's still a new day outside. These first steps are small, but they are proof that I have begun to leave the darkness bit by bit. And perhaps my journey toward healing is not a sprint, but a long journey, where each day I choose to take one more step toward the light. Depression doesn't disappear just because I found faith or started praying. It's still there, silent and persistent like a never-ending drizzle. There are still mornings when I open my eyes and feel like the whole world is weighing down on my chest. There are still long nights of tossing and turning, watching the clock tick by, hoping the sky will brighten soon. In the past, whenever that heaviness hit, I would try to escape. I would dive into social media, binge watch shows, or sleep endlessly to temporarily forget the emptiness. But then, when everything calmed down, I would fall into an even deeper darkness. The more I ran away, the more it caught up with me. The first time an unexpected wave of anxiety washed over me, I didn't reach for my phone or turn on music to drown it out. I sat still, placed my hand on my chest and whispered, "Lord, I am afraid and tired. Please be with me." In truth, prayer doesn't always bring immediate relief. Sometimes, even after praying, my mind remains chaotic and my heart heavy. But the difference is that I know I'm no longer alone. In those moments, I remember the image of a frightened child clutching his father's hand in the darkness. Though he cannot see the light, the child knows he is being guided. I also began keeping an emotional journal. Whenever darkness descended, I did not let it linger vaguely in my mind, but put it down on paper. Some pages are filled with fragmented sentences, others with nothing but tears. But as I write, I realize that these emotions have shape and boundaries. And importantly, they are not the whole of who I am. One morning, as I was getting ready to leave the house, I encountered my elderly neighbor watering her plants. She looked at me, smiled kindly, and said, "You look more cheerful today." It was just a simple sentence, but it felt like someone had lit a candle in my heart. I realized that it had been a long time since I had paid attention to such gentle words. One day, after many gloomy days, the sky suddenly cleared up. The sunlight shone through the leaves, illuminating the rain-wet road, creating sparkling spots of light. I stood there for a long time, and in that moment I heard a voice inside me say, "You are still here and the world is still beautiful." Grace also came on a peaceful afternoon when I sat with an old friend. We didn't need to say much, just sipping tea, letting silence fill the space. I realized that even when friends don't always understand my pain, their presence is a gift. I began to practice recording these traces of grace every day. Moments that warmed my heart, even if only for a few seconds. It could be the sound of birds singing outside the window, a hot plate of rice on a rainy evening, or a goodnight message from someone I thought had forgotten me. Each time I wrote, I realized these things had always been there. I just hadn't seen them before because I was too immersed in darkness. Sometimes I wondered, why didn't God use a great miracle to heal me right away? But then I understood that through these small things, He was teaching me to see the world with new eyes. Eyes that cherish every bit of love, every moment of presence. And when I, learning to recognize grace in everyday life, my heart gradually opened up, ready to embrace better things. Grace is not loud or flashy. It comes gently, enough to remind me that I am not abandoned, that each day is still a gift. And it is those small pieces that make up the picture of my healing. I realized that one of the heaviest chains binding my soul was not the pain inflicted by others, but the harshness I directed toward myself. For years, I carried a list of my sins and failures in my heart, from wrong choices, missed opportunities, to thoughtless words that hurt others. They clung to me, whispering in my ear every night that I was unworthy of love, unworthy of happiness. I used to think forgiveness was something for others. When others hurt me, I forgave them. But what about myself? To be honest, I had never considered it. I let the feeling of guilt erode my faith, as if I were punishing myself to pay the price for the past. And that is what nurtured my depression, preventing me from looking forward. One day, while reading the Bible, I came across this verse. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I read this verse over and over again. What astonished me was not only the promise of forgiveness, but also the emphasis that when God forgives, I am also cleansed, meaning I am no longer imprisoned by sin. I began to pray, not only asking God to forgive me, but also asking Him to teach me to forgive myself. At first, it was incredibly difficult. I felt like I was shirking responsibility. But then I understood. Forgiveness does not mean denying mistakes. It is accepting that I have sinned, but also believing that God can turn something bad into something good in the future. The day I truly said in prayer, "Lord, I release this burden. I accept that I am loved by you." Despite my past, I felt like I had taken a deep breath after years of being suffocated. Something heavy left my shoulders. A massive rock finally set down. From then on, whenever memories of past mistakes resurfaced, I reminded myself, that has been forgiven. It no longer has the power to control me. I began to treat myself with kindness, giving myself time to rest, allowing myself to make mistakes, and most importantly, believing that I could still grow and change. Forgiving myself not only opened a new chapter in my soul, but also made it easier for me to love and forgive others. Because when the heart is no longer imprisoned by self-blame, there is more room for compassion. Depression didn't just eat away at me from the inside, it also quietly pushed me further away from the people who loved me. I once closed the door, locked my heart, and built an invisible wall between myself and the world. During those months, even my family and friends, those who cared the most, also became outsiders because I didn't give them a chance to come in. But when grace began to touch me, I realized I couldn't continue living in isolation. One evening, I sat before my notebook and wrote down the names of those I had unintentionally hurt. The messages I ignored, the last-minute cancellations, the sad looks I pretended not to see. The list was longer than I had imagined. Each name was a crack in the connection, and I knew that if I wanted to heal, I had to start mending. The first step was my family. I remember the first time I sat down with my mother, my hands still trembling. I apologized for the cold and distant months, for letting her worry without saying a word. She didn't blame me, nor did she ask why. She simply pulled me into her arms. That embrace seemed to erase years of stiffness, and I knew I had taken a big step out of the darkness. Then came friends. There were some I had almost lost contact with. I sent messages, honestly sharing that I had gone through a difficult period and apologizing for unintentionally making them feel abandoned. What surprised me was that most responded with understanding and love. One friend even said, "I've always been here, just waiting for you to be ready." Those words touched me deeply, like proof that true friendship can endure even the longest silences. I also learned to listen more, rather than just talk. Depression once turned me into someone who only focused on my own pain, but now I gradually see the sadness, joy, and stories of others. Each sincere conversation is a thread, gradually weaving back together what had been torn apart. Reconstructing relationships not only helped me realize I wasn't alone, but also reminded me that I still hold value in others' eyes. Hugs, glances, and messages of concern all became affirmations that I am worthy of love and worthy of existence. And perhaps that is one of the strongest remedies against depression. I understand that not all relationships can be mended as before. Some people have left, and I've learned to accept that. But more importantly, I know to cherish those who remain, the lighthouse keepers who quietly stand at the dark crossroads, waiting for me to find my way back. There was a time when I thought joy was something grand, brilliant, and unexpected, like a luxurious trip, a resounding success, or an unexpected gift from someone. But after living too long in the darkness of depression, I realized sometimes to start over, all you need are small rays of light. My mornings now begin with a cup of hot coffee, the sound of boiling water, the aroma of coffee spreading, and the warmth of the ceramic cup in my hands all blend into a moment of peace. I don't rush to drink it, but take slow sips, letting the slight bitterness melt on my tongue, then giving way to a hint of sweetness in the aftertaste. In that moment, I feel alive. Some days I choose to go to the park near my house, walking slowly along the path covered in leaves. The sound of birds singing, the wind rustling through the trees, and the sound of my footsteps on the ground. All of it become a gentle melody. I no longer strive to find profound meaning in each day, but simply allow simple moments to slip into my mind, like small bricks rebuilding a collapsed wall. I also bought a few small potted plants. At first, it was just a passing fancy, but gradually caring for them became a real joy. Every time I see a new sprout emerge or a new leaf unfurl, I feel very clearly that life continues, despite every winter. And like the plants, my heart is also reviving little by little. The most important thing, and what I cherish most, is the morning prayer ritual. In the past, prayer felt foreign to me, but now it's like breathing, natural and necessary. I sit by the window, hands on the Bible, and talk to God like a close friend. Sometimes I just say, "Thank you for letting me be here today." Other times it's a whisper of anxiety, asking Him to help me through a difficult day. And each time I feel a gentle peace envelop me. I've learned that happiness doesn't have to be extraordinary. A cup of coffee, a sunny morning, a green leaf, a prayer. All of these things together create enough strength to lift me out of the depths. And as I began to appreciate these small things, my heart gradually opened to embrace the greater joys that lay ahead. For a long time, I dared not dream. In the darkest days, the future was a terrifying void where I saw nothing but emptiness. But now, as my heart grows lighter and light begins to seep in, I allow myself to think about tomorrow without fear. My dreams no longer take the form of dazzling ambitions or successes that others would marvel at. They are simple: to be healthy in both mind and body, to be loved, and to be able to spread that love. I dream of mornings where I wake up with a genuine smile, of afternoons where I can chat comfortably with someone without feeling the weight in my heart. I dream of a life where every step has meaning, no matter how small. What surprises me is that, with God by my side, those dreams no longer cause me anxiety or pressure. I no longer feel like I have to struggle to make them come true. Instead, I believe that I just need to take one step at a time, and He will lead me on the right path. The future is no longer a vague abyss, but a wide field where I can sow seeds of hope. I began to write down small plans, for example, learning a new skill, exercising every morning, or spending time volunteering. These things used to seem impossible to me, but now they have become a source of motivation. I no longer see myself as a burden, but as someone who can contribute, even if it's just a smile or a word of encouragement to someone else. One evening, while standing by the window watching the sunset, I suddenly realized what revived me was not just escaping the darkness, but finding a reason to keep moving forward. And that reason was hope. Hope that each new day could bring something good. I hope that God's love will be enough to carry me through every challenge. And I hope that my story can be a source of comfort to someone who is where I once was. New hope does not come like a violent storm, but gently like the dawn, quietly yet surely dispelling the darkness. And I know that from here on, my journey is not just about surviving, but about truly living. One quiet afternoon, as I sat at my usual cafe, my phone vibrated. A message from an old friend. "Are you free? I need to talk." I recognized that tone immediately. Heavy, urgent, yet hesitant. Not long ago, I had sent messages like that myself. We met. As soon as my friend sat down, I saw those eyes, tired, lifeless, as if they had lost their way. "You talked about sleepless nights, about the overwhelming feeling of being unable to escape, about the growing urge to give up everything." Every word pulled me back into my own past. But this time, I was no longer the one drowning in darkness. I was the one standing on the other side, reaching out my hand. I didn't offer empty advice. Instead, I shared my own story, about the days I thought were the end, about the small moment that kept me going, about how God found me in the midst of despair. As I spoke, you listened in silence. At times, your eyes welled up, and I knew you were feeling the truth in every word. I said I understood what it felt like to be hopeless, but I also shared that darkness isn't everything. There is a light waiting, and sometimes all we need is to hold on to a small ray of it to keep going. I encourage you to seek help, from family, friends, and even from the one who can heal the depths of your soul. That day, we didn't find immediate solutions to all the problems, but I saw a change in your eyes. Not much, but like a seed that had just been planted. And I realized that by sharing my story, I wasn't just helping you, I was healing myself once again. The suffering I had endured suddenly no longer felt meaningless. It became a bridge for me to reach out to others to say, "You are not alone. I have been there, and I believe you can come out too." That was the moment I understood that God's grace did not just save me so that I could live, but also so that I could become a source of comfort and hope for someone else. From that day on, I began to pay more attention to those around me, colleagues, neighbors, even strangers I happened to meet. I learned to listen more, ask questions more sincerely, and be willing to share my story when needed. Each time I felt an unusual warmth, as if I were part of a circle of grace. I received, then gave, and then received even more. Helping others doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a cup of hot tea, a message of concern, or a tight hug. But for someone drowning in darkness, those things can be a guiding light. And I know that if someone hadn't reached out to me back then, I might not be here today doing the same. When I first emerged from the dark days of depression, I simply thought that I needed to get well again, to find peace for myself. But gradually I realized that grace did not stop at healing me. It also compelled me to become part of the healing story for others. At first, I joined a small group at church where people shared their life experiences and prayed for one another. I didn't speak much. I just listened. But their testimonies planted a thought in me. Perhaps God also wants to use my story for someone else out there. That thought was vague at first, but it grew clearer over time. I began participating in community activities, cooking for the homeless, visiting patients in the hospital, and helping children with their studies. The initial volunteer outings left me physically exhausted, but strangely rejuvenated my spirit. I felt connected to people and the world in a new way. I remember one afternoon while serving food to a homeless man, he smiled and said, "Thank you, dear. It's been a long time since someone looked me in the eye and smiled." Those words brought tears to my eyes. It turned out that a simple smile, a glance, or a sincere presence could change someone's moment. And I began to understand that my calling might simply be to bring the light of love and care into the darkest places. I also started sharing my story at youth gatherings. At first, I was afraid people would judge or pity me. But when I saw the sparkle in their eyes when people approached me after the talk to share their stories, I knew I had touched them. One girl said, "I thought I couldn't get through it, but hearing you talk, I feel there's hope." Living out my calling isn't always easy. There are times when I still doubt myself, still wonder if I'm good enough to help someone. But every time that happens, I remember the grace that lifted me up, remembering that God doesn't choose perfect people to do perfect work. He chooses those who are willing. Now I am no longer someone who avoids the world. I am someone who steps out to meet others, to love, to give. Not because I am no longer weak, but because I have found a strength greater than myself. And I know that as long as I breathe, I will continue to walk the path of calling that God has set before me. I once thought freedom meant no more difficulties, no more tears, no more sleepless nights. In my imagination, it was a smooth life, with no one to hurt me, no worries about the future. But then, the healing journey gave me a different definition, a much deeper one. True freedom is not the absence of problems, but when problems no longer imprison my soul. I still have weary days, still face challenges, but now I know I no longer have to struggle alone in the darkness. Faith gives me a silent strength, like a sturdy anchor in the storm. In the past, I feared thinking about past mistakes. I lived in a constant sense of guilt, as if I were imprisoned in an invisible jail. I believed I was unworthy of forgiveness. That's why I avoided every opportunity to live fully. But when I realized that God's grace doesn't depend on my worthiness, but on His unconditional love, those chains fell away. I began to notice something miraculous. When I was no longer bound by fear and guilt, I could love more freely, give more generously, and live more authentically. I no longer had to pretend to be strong to be accepted. I could be weak, I could fail, and still be loved completely. True freedom does not mean doing whatever I want. It is not about letting go, but about choosing what is good even when what is bad is easier. I can forgive instead of seeking revenge, be patient instead of getting angry, hope instead of despair. Not because I am good at it, but because God's love has changed me from the inside out. One day as I sat by the window watching the clouds drift by, I suddenly recalled the dark days of my past. If someone had told me then that I would have such a peaceful day, I wouldn't have believed it. But now I see clearly. Peace is not when the wind stops blowing, but when my heart remains steadfast in the midst of the wind. I don't know what the future will bring. There will be times when difficulties return, times when I feel weak. But I know I have found true freedom, the freedom of a soul that has been forgiven, loved, and no longer controlled by fear. Looking back on the journey I've taken, I realize it hasn't been a straight path. There were days when I thought I had stepped out of the darkness, but then a cold breeze of memory, an offhand remark, would bring me down again. Yet unlike before, I no longer fear those moments of weakness, for I know that even when I fall, His grace still holds me. Depression was once a gray, cold wall that separated me from everything. I thought it would be my prison for life, but little by little, light seeped through the cracks, through prayer, through the arms of loved ones, through mornings when I opened my eyes and decided to live another day. Now when I step outside on a sunny morning, I don't just see a new day, I see an opportunity to love, to share, to live fully. From merely hoping to get through today, I now look forward to tomorrow. I still remember the long, restless nights, the rainy afternoons that weighed heavily on my heart. But now those memories are like old pages in a book, reminding me of how far I've come. I have learned that healing is not about erasing all traces of suffering, but about being able to look back at the past without being consumed by it. I still remember the long, restless nights, the rainy afternoons that weighed heavily on my heart. But now, those memories are like old pages in a book, reminding me of how far I've come. Grace not only saved me, but transformed me. It made me grateful for every breath, every laugh, every hug. And above all, it gave me a mission, to be a testament that darkness cannot overcome light. If you, the one reading these words, are where I once was, I want to tell you, you are not alone. No matter how dark things may seem around you, there is a God who, I love you more than you can imagine, ready to step into your darkness to lead you out. All you need to do is dare to wait a little longer, believe a little more. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who is holding my hand, and that is enough for me to live each day with deep gratitude, because I, who once fell, have been healed, not by my own strength, but by grace. The journey from depression to being healed by grace has completely transformed me. From wanting to give up, I have found a reason to live and to love. If this story touches your heart, I hope you will continue to walk with me so that we can journey together on the path of healing and faith. If you are seeking encouragement, prayer, or simply a place to be heard and understood, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new shares. Each subscription is not just a click, but a reminder that we never have to fight alone. Together, we will continue to sow seeds of hope and love into this world.